Welcome, everyone, to the Unquestionably Raw podcast, part of the 16 Wins a Ring podcast network. We've got Keith Smith with us as always. And Keith, for those that you did not listen to the show at the end of last week on Friday, Keith is now a key member officially as part of the team. He's not just guesting anymore. So, Keith, I'm going to go to you and let you explain the site launch for 16 Wins a Ring.
Yeah, sure. So we are really excited. This is launch week for us with 16 Wins a Ring. It's going to be both a written content website as well as a podcast network, which Unquestionably Raw will be a big part of the podcast network. Really happy to have the team as a part of that group there, as we're looking to generate almost daily podcast content about the NBA and across all basketball. And then on the written side, the site itself will launch on the 22nd of December. So get a lot of great content pouring in from a lot of really good writers. We put together a really great staff of writers and analysts and data folks, and we've got a little bit of everything. So something for everyone within that group. So really excited to get the site launched. We've got a lot of great content going up right on day one. So check that out at 16winsaring.com. That'll be up, like I said, on the 22nd.
Nice. Great. We're happy to be a part of it. But today we wanted to talk about the collective bargaining agreement and just kind of everything that it entails. And Keith, with you being kind of the salary cap guru and everything, this is right up your alley, of course. And so I want to jump right into it. And let's just start by covering the outline of the deal, just for our listeners that are not familiar with kind of what the CBA is. Let's talk about kind of when the deal needs to be ratified by, how many years does it cover, those kind of things.
Yeah, so originally the opt-out date was in a little less than a week ago on December 15th. So that was the side that either the Players Association or the NBA could have opted out of the current CBA. And what they agreed to do, because if you get to that date and then they opt out, excuse me, it becomes very messy. It turns into almost a lockout or strike situation, and no one really wanted that. It's been going very well. There's been no acrimony through these negotiations. So what they collectively agreed to do is said, hey, we're really close on this new deal. We just ran out of time, really, to run it by the players and get it ratified. So they agreed to push everything back to January 13th. So on January 13th is when they'll have the new CBA ratified. So just kind of ticking and tying, tying up some loose ends here for the remainder of the next month or so. Plus, it also gives them the opportunity to take a little break over the holidays. The NBA doesn't stop, but no one wants to be sitting in boardrooms negotiating contract terms over Christmas. So they're going to back off of that just a bit, get it in front of all the players just after the first of the year, and tweak what needs tweaked and get everything ratified in January. And then we'll have labor peace for a minimum of at least 6 years. It's going to be a 7-year deal, but with an opt-out after 6, which is the standard. That's what we've seen over the last couple of CBAs. So we'll have at least 6 years of labor peace, and really looking forward to that. It's great. Both sides really working together. They know how good they have it. No one's going to wreck it.
Absolutely. Yeah, because we saw what happened with that mess in 2011.
Absolutely.
No one wants that. No one wants that again. All right. Let's look at the salary cap changes in this new agreement. What are the biggest changes and some subtle ones that the casual fan needs to know?
Sure. So for the cap itself, there's not a lot of changes to the way the salary cap number. So, the 100 million, 103 million, wherever you basically see the salary cap at in the future. There's not really any change to that, which is good. The players are guaranteed to get somewhere between 49 and 51% of all revenues, basketball related. So there's a little bit of work being done around tweaking what are basketball revenues, and it's really minute and boring stuff. In my opinion, it's things like if a corporation buys a suite in an arena, they only got the basketball revenue, but they're really only buying it for the basketball revenue, but then they have it for concerts and all this other stuff. So it's really defining things like that. So that's what's going to trigger that. Then one thing that is changing that is kind of cap related is the luxury tax apron, or what's commonly referred to as the hard cap. Today is set at $4 million above whatever the luxury tax line is. In the new CBA, it'll climb to $6 million above, and then it'll raise as everything else goes up and down accordingly. And so the good thing is that's going to give teams a little bit more wiggle room there. A couple things that are happening with salaries and things like that are the cap exceptions. So the salary exceptions, the mid-level exception, non-taxpayer and taxpayer, as well as the biannual exception and the room exception. Those will all now be tied to the cap after next season. So next season, 2017-18, is going to be almost a bridge year to getting into this new CBA. So what's going to happen next year is those are going to raise by 45%. So those numbers will jump up into new ranges, making them far more competitive today, because in the current CBA, those are set amounts per year. So it was, a little over $5 million or so for the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. And when you've got average salaries starting to push the heck out of $10 million, that doesn't really help anybody. No one's willing to sign for that. Mm-hmm. So what they've done is they've done this 45% jump as the bridge, and then they'll be tied into a percentage of the cap going forward, which is going to work out a lot better for everybody. The other big change is max salaries. Today, they're commonly referred to as 25, 30, and 35% of the salary cap. And that's a little bit of a misnomer. They're actually 25, 30, and 35% of a formula based off BRI, or basketball related income. So they're tweaking it, and it's really going to be a percentage of the salary cap, which is fantastic. So we're really excited to see that. That's going to make things a lot easier to follow, instead of all of us, okay, the cap set, then you get to back into the BRI number, and then you can back into the max salary tiers. It's just going to be a straight number. So if the cap's at 100 million, it'll be 25, 30, and 35 million for that first year salary. And one other tweak related to those is today max raises are at 4.5% or 7.5%. So the 4.5% is if you're a non-bird free agent, or if you're changing teams, your salary can only go up from the first year by 4.5%. Then it's not compounding interest, so it's whatever that number works out to. So let's say it was 10 million, it can only go up 45,000. And then what can happen is, so then you'd be at 10 million, 45,000. And then the next year, it's not another 4.5%, it's another 45,000. So that's how it goes up from there. In the new CBA, they're giving those a bump up to be a little bit more competitive in the new marketplace, to 5% and 8%. So that 8% will be if you're remaining with your current team as a bird free agent. So a lot of little things in there, but it's all little stuff that adds up to big stuff.
Which is why, is this part of the reason why a guy like Steph Curry, LeBron James are probably going to make upwards of $200 million on their next contracts?
You got it, Matt.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and Steph Curry, I think we'll probably talk on the extensions a little bit later, because there's specific wording around his situation. But LeBron James, and I'm glad you brought him up, Matt, because what's going to happen with LeBron is, in the current CBA, there's a rule called the over 36 rule. And what that rule does is that rule essentially protects teams from themselves. A lot of the CBA is written to protect teams from making stupid decisions that they'll regret down the line. Yes. Even though they still manage to pull that off quite often sometimes. Mm-hmm. But what that over 36 rule does is it's going to keep a guy like LeBron James in today's world at the over 36 from being able to sign a super long-term contract over 36 years old. They're bumping that to over 38. There's a couple reasons. The number one reason, let's not be naive, the head of the players union right now, those guys are approaching that point in their age.
Right.
So Chris Paul, LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, the guys have a lot of sway, Dwayne Wade, those guys are starting to push the heck out of that over 38 rule. The other piece is players are being productive players much later into their careers than they ever were before.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it used to be by the time a guy was passing 30, he was on the downswing of his career. Now, we're seeing these guys, who knows how long LeBron can be a productive
Yeah,
player.
I mean, look, we saw Michael do it at 40.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and back then he was the complete exception, right? Now you've got, you could have 5, 6, 7, 8 guys that age, still really solid. So that's another tweak that's coming in the new CBA.
Yeah, look at what Vince Carter's doing. Imagine just the athleticism of LeBron and just what kind of, man, him playing until 40, 42. I mean, that's amazing compared to, like you said, where we were before. But
hey, so you got to give a big shout out to Kareem, because Kareem was really the first.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, he was the first. Moving on, what are the changes to the trade rules for teams?
Yeah, so there's definitely some new rules that really we just found out about in the last couple of days. They're really interesting. The big one is that non-guaranteed contracts now, or partially guaranteed contracts, in a trade in today's world, their salary count. So I'm going to use Boris Diaw as the example. Next year, if we're operating in the new, well, let's use the current first. In today's world, if the Jazz want to trade Boris Diaw next league year, he's got a $7.5 million salary, but it's completely non-guaranteed. Mm-hmm. So in today's world, they can trade $7.5 million and use that towards matching salary to bring anybody in, which is great. It's a great tool. And then if the acquiring team said, we don't really want Boris Diaw, they can just waive him at no cost to them. We saw the Cavaliers make great use of this by when they dumped Brandon Hayward. They dumped him to generate a $10 million trade exception. They traded him off, and that created it. And then he just got waived at no cost to the acquiring team. So what's going to happen in the new agreement for any new contract signed, so that was confirmed a little bit later today, any new contract signed, so it'll be once the new CBA's in, so any guys we see signed this summer, let's go back to Boris Diaw. If that's a new deal for $7.5 million, but none of it is guaranteed, he counts as $0 in a trade. So you can't use any of his salary towards trade matching. So what they're doing is trying to eliminate this. Really, it's kind of shenanigans of having these giant non-guaranteed contracts where teams are just using the player really as a piece.
Dump them.
Yeah, exactly. Because nobody really, all due respect to Brandon Haywood, but nobody wanted him.
So is this kind of a deal to prevent teams from using this clause to create super teams?
Yeah, there is definitely there's a piece in that. So what they're doing is it's funny. I always like to say with the CBA, there's always give and take. For everything you give on one side, they're going to take back something on the other side to keep relative balance in the league. So they gave these raises and all these other things that you can do and bump the money up, but then they're making it more convenient for teams to keep the talent that they have. And then with this trade rule, that's a big one. So that is a pretty major change for those of us who get really, caught up in roster and trade minutia.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So we've got Mitch McGary, OJ Mayo. They're probably the biggest, most recent cases for suspensions. Can you touch on the changes to the suspension rules for players?
Yeah. So one of the things that the current CBA doesn't really define well is the rules around suspensions. There's rules in there, but there's a lot of vagueness within the language, and it left a lot to be questioned. So one of the things that they did with this is they cleaned things up quite a bit. So drug suspensions, which the NBA has done a really good job of calling out true drug suspensions for years. That goes back to before any of our time, but in the late 70s when it seems like half the league was using cocaine on a regular basis, and they wanted to clean it up. So one of the things that they've always done that. But there's new language. I have not seen it yet, so I don't know exactly what it is. But there's going to definitely, I've had it confirmed that there's new language in there around marijuana use, as I think we're now over half the country has made, recreational marijuana use legal or medicinal.
Mm-hmm. So are they going to be lenient on stuff like that might not result in a suspension?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to go quite to say lenient just yet, but there could be different language around in season versus off season and how that works. So we'll have to see. That's going to be when we're going to have to wait probably till the CBA itself comes out. But one of the other thing they did was they really defined suspensions around performance-enhancing drugs. So
Yeah.
I believe it's going to be 25 games for a first-time offense, and then
Nice.
5 for a second. So they're not messing around. They're really gonna, they're gonna take these guys out pretty big time. And then in cases of domestic violence, which unfortunately is something we do see, we wish we didn't, but we do. They're gonna go in and they're gonna really define what that looks like around making sure that they can say this is the standard punishment and this is what it will be if you do those kind of things. So I don't want to bring it back up, but Darren Collison this past summer, and he got an 8-game suspension, and there was a lot of, was that enough? Was that too much? So there's going to be defined regulation around what that triggers.
I like that it sounds like they're going to be a little more strict than even Major League Baseball. I think baseball, your first offense, it's like a fourth of the season you get suspended. In the NBA, it's basically a third.
Yeah, it's something that I know they're really passionate about cleaning up. And the good thing is the players themselves are also pretty passionate about it. They don't want it in there either. They don't have a lot of patience for guys who do that kind of stuff. So we'll see how it all ultimately plays out in the end. But.
And that's smart because we see how it taints baseball.
Absolutely, yeah, and nobody wants that in their game.
No,
absolutely. With all the recent backlash kind of involving Donatas Motiejunas as a restricted free agent, what changes can we look forward to regarding restricted free agency in the agreement?
So what we're going to see is not super big changes, but there's going to be some changes coming. So one of the things for restricted free agency that had been reported that has now since been, I don't want to say retracted, but proven that it's not in there is, in restricted free agency, in order to keep restricted free agent rights, so match rights on a player, you have to issue them what's called a qualifying offer, which is basically a 1-year contract for a set amount based off of the salary scale that says this is how much we would pay you if you sign this 1-year deal. We don't see the player sign those all too often. Greg Monroe signed his a couple years ago and said, you know what, I'm going to sign this, take this money, and then I'll go be a free agent, an unrestricted free agent after. Generally, we see players skip that because they assume, right or wrong, that they can get more money in offers or out of their team themselves. So one of the things that came out with the agreement came out in the last couple of days is that the restricted free agent process, what was thought was if the team issues that qualifying offer, the team can't then rescind it later. And really what that does is that hurts the players. They had up until towards the end of July to pull those qualifying offers back and say, all right, that's not on the table anymore. So now what has happened is they have changed the date. It's going to be July 13th, so only a week after the moratorium ends. If you put a qualifying offer, the team can still rescind it, but they'll pull it. They can pull it then. It doesn't need to be a mutual agreement between the team and the player, which was what was originally thought. One other thing that they changed in the restricted free agent process, is with arenas free agents. So if you remember, let's go use Tyler Johnson as the example because he's the most real world recent example. A lot of people also remember Jeremy Lin and Omer Asik on this one. Tyler Johnson got that huge offer sheet from the Nets, which was a lot of money spread over 4 years. If he had gone to the Nets, his salary would have been spread evenly over the course of the 4-year agreement. Mm-hmm. By the Heat matching, the Heat ended up paying Johnson a set amount in the first year, which was a little over $5 million or so. Same thing for the second year, and then his contract spikes up to around $19 million for the last.
So it's backloaded.
Correct. That was made. The original intent of the rule was to make it prohibitive for the incumbent team to match because of that odd salary structure. What we found was teams basically said, no, we'll get them on the cheap at the front end, and then we'll just figure it out later. So what they've decided to do now in the new agreement is if the incumbent team matches, it's their choice. They can either take it at that staggered and then the huge jump, or they can say, spread it even right off the jump across the cap. And it gives teams that much more cap flexibility in the beginning. So if you're trying to keep your guy but then add another player, you're able to do so.
Didn't Chicago do that with J.J. Redick back like in 2010? They backloaded his salary to make it tough for Orlando to match, which obviously Orlando matched it.
Yeah, I don't remember the detail on that one. I don't remember how his contract ultimately was structured. Actually, I know with JJ that wouldn't have been the case because JJ would have been a what I call a regular restricted free agent coming off a first round pick. This is only for those Arenas players that get structured.
Okay.
But they may have done some odd structuring where his deal was front loaded on the
that's what it was. They did. They front loaded it. That's what they did.
And that you still will see happen from time to time. You'll see teams do that. The thing that's different with the Arenas, they can jump by more than the set 4.5% amount in those later years because it jumps up to balance out the remainder of the contract.
Yeah.
If for a regular free agent signing, you can only go up or down by that set amount. So either the student to be 5% or 8%.
Okay. Very good. All right. So the NBA has agreed to revisit the one and done rule at a later date. But there are some changes to the rookie salaries. Can you touch on those for us?
Yeah, for sure. So what's happening with the rookie salaries is pretty good. The first thing is they're also going forward. So anybody who's drafted in 2017-18, their salary will be tied to the salary cap, which is really, pretty exciting. It'll be, it's going to flex up and down. So teams aren't going to get these super amazing deals on rookie salaries anymore as the cap has jumped way up. But what they're doing to help out current players, so let's use Karl Anthony Towns as an example here, or Jaylen Brown, or Brandon Ingram, or even Ben Simmons, they're going to increase their salary amounts to bring them up to a more, I hesitate to use the term reasonable because it's already unreasonable what all these guys get paid. They're guys like us, but bring them into a more commensurate rate. Let's use that with the remainder of their teammates. So what they're doing is they're going to bring their salaries up, but their salary cap hit, the number that really most of us care about, because let's face it, we're not paying their salary, so I don't care how much money they make, is going to stay exactly what it is today. So what's going to happen is, and I'm just going to use some fake numbers here, but let's say Ben Simmons' number this coming year is supposed to be $6 million, and let's say they're going to raise it to $7.5 million. That $1.5 million gets paid to him, but his salary cap number doesn't change. So that doesn't put the teams in a tricky spot. It'll stay the same. But then any new players will come in at the new scale amount, and that's what it'll raise up to. So again, it's one of those give and take. Give a little here, but you're going to also get a little on the back end.
Nice. What now? This one and done. You think they're going to try to make a change to that when they do revisit it?
Yeah. So the cool thing is So let's talk about what happened with that because I think it's a really interesting theory. The Players Association proposed a 0-2 rule, which is very similar if you follow at all Major League Baseball's policy, which is
you either go to college, you
either go to
pro or
yeah, exactly. You go to school or you come right out. So what they said was they proposed let's do the 0-2, so guys can come right out, and if they do, they come right into the NBA. If they don't, let's hold that, and then they go to school. They're stuck at school for 2 years before they can apply for the draft. So the NBA wasn't necessarily opposed to that, but the NBA countered back with, then let's make the minimum age requirement 20, which the Players Association doesn't want. So both sides agreed, we're getting late in the negotiations. We don't want to make this the sticking point that holds up all the other good stuff we've come up with. Let's table it for now, and we'll come back to it. So the cool part is, while they're going to keep the rule as it is today with no changes, both sides have agreed we can adjust and collectively bargain and change this rule within the framework of the agreement we already have set up. So it's not necessarily that we're stuck with this for the next 6 years. They said we can come back to this in a year or 2 years or whenever and see if there's motivation to change it. One of the big pushes to change it, which we didn't touch on yet, is the change to the new two-way contracts. So what's going to happen is roster sizes are going to go from 15 maximum to 17, with every team having the ability to have a minimum of 2 two-way contract players on their team. What a two-way contract, again, borrowed from the Major League Baseball model. What that does is it says when they're down in the D League, they get paid an amount of money that's fair for the D League pay. When they're up with the big club, they get paid an amount of money that has them up with the big club. And that allows teams to shuttle back and forth. Adam Silver is passionate that he makes the D League into a true minor league to develop players for the NBA teams. And this is a step in that direction. So this is a part of why some think they may change the draft rules to bring guys in, because then you can really use this two-way contract, put them in the D League.
So you could essentially, you come out of high school, you get picked 9th overall. They send you down to the D League as that 9th pick, but you're not going to get that NBA salary down there. But when they call you up, then you'll get the salary.
Yeah, I don't know how it would work for first round picks. Those might be a little bit different, but it leads into a good point. It's a good segue into this is where some people think when there are 30 D League franchises, which we're progressing towards, that there will be a third round of the draft added.
Yep.
And it'll be those second and third round guys that'll be more targeted for those two-way deals.
Because our first round contracts are guaranteed, so that would be tough to do that.
Yeah, so the first round probably stays kind of like it is, and then they'll go, to that for those second and third round guys as they fill out the D League. But so for me, I'm really passionate on the D League. I want to see it become something big. So I'm really excited about the changes that are coming there.
Now, with that two-way kind of contract, is there any kind of stipulation on how often a player can be sent down, or can they just leave them down there and say, all right, you're going to play the season? Kind of like a example was Andrew Harrison, where he got drafted in the first round. They left him kind of in the D League to develop. Josh Hustis, another one. Are they kind of thinking of that kind of model?
Yeah, I don't. Again, so Harrison, a little bit different with his situation, but Josh Hustis, that is a good example. That one would probably work similar to like how it works now, where they can. So essentially, what it is for the first 3 years of a player's career, the team can send them up and down as much as they want.
Okay.
And then after that, the player needs to agree to go down. So we've seen some teams use that almost, again, like Major League Baseball. They're using a lot of their stuff here, almost like a rehab assignment, where they sent the guy down and said, Nerlens Noel, good example. Well, that whole situation's gone south, but there was a good example of send him down, let him get some game action in, almost like a rehab assignment before he came back up to the Sixers. So we could see more of that continue. It's all designed around let's make the D League a reasonable alternative, because what they don't want to do is they don't want to continue to lose good, talented players overseas, because the big thing is overseas they can make a lot more money than they can here in the U.S. So a lot of guys, they head overseas. But then on the player side, it becomes harder, because then if an NBA team comes calling, it's next to impossible for them to get out of a contract overseas to come back home. Even the ones with the NBA outs, sometimes the cost is so prohibitive to the player to come back that it's just not worth it. So by making the D League a more attractive alternative, you can have those guys, hanging out there waiting for that call-up opportunity and coming back, or even saying, you know what, hey, you're a part of our organization, and we're going to treat you as such throughout. That's also a part of the reason why you're seeing more and more D League teams moving their franchise or creating their franchise to be within driving distance. So Orlando's going to be the next one next year. Their D League team will be about an hour and a half, 2 hours down the road in Lakeland, Florida, versus being in Erie, Pennsylvania, because what they want to be able to do is practice with us in the morning with the big team, and then we're going to send you down the street and you're going to play in the game that night down there. And they'll make
that's like with the Bulls. Their D League teams in Hoffman Estates, which is maybe 30 minutes from the United Center.
Yeah, the Knicks are a great example too. The Knicks D League team plays at the Knicks practice facility.
yeah.
So the guys can literally come in the morning, practice with the Knicks themselves, the New York Knicks in the NBA, hang out there, and then play with the Westchester Knicks that evening in the D League game. They're being really creative with how they use this, and I think they're making some great strides.
That's a long way from years ago where you had like one or two known guys and the rest were like, who is this guy? Like, really?
That's because all the good players, they would go overseas. Like, I think it was probably 6-7 years ago, Kenny Taylor from University of Texas was lighting up the D-League. He's shooting like 56% from 3, 30 a game. Russia came calling, and he was gone.
Yeah, and I don't think that's going to necessarily change for those really top-end guys because the D-League salaries are never going to be in the millions of dollars.
No.
And those guys can make that overseas. But, yeah, but to Pete's point, it used to be, a guy like, it was one NBA talent guy with 3 dudes like us out on the court at a time. And
Exactly.
Started to make you wonder, well, all right, so that dude dropped 55, but how good is he?
Exactly.
When he's dunking on a 5'9" guy like me.
Yes.
All right. Well, looking at the contract extensions, they're obviously a big deal to teams that want to prevent losing their big stars to upcoming free agency. What are the details surrounding the contract extensions and the new CBA?
Yeah, so this is probably the biggest thing that's coming out of the CBA. And this is that give and take. So what they're trying to do is they are trying to make it, let's use Kevin Durant because he's the example. He's the real world example for why this is kind of a push. They want to make it so that Kevin Durant's ability to make more money in his home place, so Oklahoma City, if this was in place last summer, is that much greater that the guys will stay with those teams. So they've changed a couple things with it. One is teams used to be restricted to one designated player extension. So this was the Rose Rule, as it's commonly referred to. And we saw this happen with the Minnesota Timberwolves, where they didn't give Kevin Love a full 5-year max contract because they were saving it for Ricky Rubio in case they needed to. Right? It just sounds silly, but
that really worked out well, didn't it?
Yeah, wonderful it worked out for Kevin Love, okay, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So,
not for the Timberwolves, though.
Yeah, no. So one of the things that they've done is they've now said you can have 2, which that's great, and it doesn't have to be restricted to just guys coming off their rookie contract. So you can still do it that way, but you can also do it with veterans. So veterans who qualify, and there's a bunch of list of qualifiers as far as when they signed their most recent extension, how quickly they can renegotiate and extend and those kind of things. But the big things I don't want to touch on that are really important for people to understand is that, so let's continue to use Kevin Durant as an example. The player needs to meet one of 3 criteria. In the prior season, he needs to have been on an all-NBA team, so one of the first, second, or third team, which means, in theory, you're one of the 15 to 20 best players in the entire NBA. You need to have been the MVP, or you need to have been the Defensive Player of the Year. Or you could have done that in 2 of the prior 3 seasons. So that's protecting against if a guy did that for 2 straight years, then blew out his knee and missed the whole season, you still have that ability to sign this guy to this big contract. And what they're allowing you to do is, in the old world, you couldn't, in effect, ignore the player's years of service, which is what defines those max tiers. So 0 to 6 years was the 25% and still will be the 25%. 7 to 9 years of service is the 30%, and then 10 plus years of service is the 35%. What they're going to do is they're going to allow you to go right to that 35% if the player meets that criteria. So a guy like Steph Curry is eligible for this because he's been all world for the last few years. Plus, he meets that criteria. He's also eligible because he's ready to be a free agent. But once this kicks in, the Warriors could extend him. And Matt, this goes back to something you said way back at the beginning of the podcast. This is how they're going to pay all these guys, these crazy numbers, right? People have been doing the math, and it's 200.
So that's how they're going to keep all 4 of them.
Yeah, well, so here's what's tricky. Kevin Durant isn't eligible for it.
Because he's only been there for a year?
Another criteria is you either needed to be drafted by the team or traded to the team under that contract to do it. You can't be a free agent who signed with that team. So Durant isn't eligible for this. Now, they still have the ability to go over and above the cap because of, different bird and early bird and non-bird rights and all those kind of
things. They have to sign. They would essentially have to sign Durant first, wouldn't they? To keep all of them.
Yep. Durant's got to be the first domino to fall, and it's looking more and more like, in order to keep Kevin Durant, they're going to have to lose some of those bench guys that they probably would rather not lose, like an Andre Iguodala or a Sean Livingston. One of the two of them is definitely going to go.
But what if so let's say they don't want to lose these guys. Obviously, you want to keep Curry and Durant, but you don't want to lose the bench guys. So let's say they have to choose. Do we choose Curry or Durant? Because that's a possibility.
Yeah, it could be. That's not I wouldn't want to be Bob Myers making that decision.
But when you have a team like this, you can get all those vets who will take a 1-year minimum deal.
Yeah, and the big thing is, so what the NBA has basically done here is they're not saying teams and players can't do this. They're saying they're never going to come out and say a Heat or a Warriors can't happen, because I don't know that the NBA is necessarily all that against these super teams.
No, it's good for the NBA.
They only veto the Chris Paul trades.
Yeah. Well, that was different though. The owners own the Pelicans,
and that was a very messy situation where the league owned the team and all.
I know. I just like to throw it out there just because it was nonsense.
But
I was going to say this Warriors team. The only reason this could happen though is because Curry had a bargain contract.
Curry. Yeah, this was an absolute perfect storm. Curry had a bargain contract. The cap spiked at the exact right time. Mm-hmm. All these things came together. But what I will say is, so the NBA is not going to say, no, you can't do it. If you want to take less money, go by all means. You can do that. You can build your super team. But what they are saying is, but are you going to turn down $200 million from your incumbent team to do this, to take, and I've seen the math worked out a little bit. It's almost a $60 to $70 million difference over the life of the contract. I know these guys make a lot of money, and $100 million is more than probably most of them can spend, but that's a huge, massive difference in money there. I don't know
how much do you really want to win?
Exactly. Yeah. How much do you want to play with your buddies? And go out there and get it. So they're making it a lot easier for teams to retain their stars. And it's one of those things. One other thing I want to touch on, I know it's not on our list, but I want to make sure I bring it up. There is 100% no amnesty clause in this new CBA. That question comes up quite a bit.
So the Knicks are stuck with Joakim.
I'm not going to necessarily go there, but I do know that there's only a couple teams that asked and pushed for an amnesty clause. All the other teams said, no, we don't want to let people off the hook. The NBA's position on the amnesty clause is they only introduce it when they make significant changes to the way the cap and tax program work, which they did in the last couple of CBAs. Everybody thinks it's just a get-out-of-jail-free card, but what it also is we change the rules on you pretty significantly, so we're going to allow you to free some space up and be able to operate under this new structure. And this year, they didn't do that in this CBA. And on top of that, you had 28 teams saying, no, we're not going to let a couple bonehead decisions go by the wayside just because they want out of them.
Mm-hmm. And that'll teach these owners not to give out these crazy contracts to Joakim Noah. And then we'll have a lockout because we don't want to pay the players anymore.
I'd like to think so, but my history tells us NBA owners can't be helped from themselves. There's a reason Zach Lowe calls it the silly season.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah, you got, what was it, a couple years ago, Sagana Diop got all that money, and I was like, I swear to God, I wish I was 7 foot tall, because I would be a millionaire right now.
Yeah,
but that's what I was
tall. Yeah, tall. Hey, you can play in the NBA, and they'll give you $10 million.
7 foot tall and able to run up and down the court 3 or 4 times in a row.
Exactly.
And guaranteed at least a couple million.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that actually segues us into, speaking of running the floor, into our one of our first closing topics. We have 3 to kind of close out the show. First one being Nerlens Noel. Basically went from, he played 8 minutes as he got back basically into the rotation for a brief moment. Now he is officially out of the rotation. He changed agents, and it's just all kind of disgruntledness from his standpoint of he wants to play, doesn't see how it's going to work. Brett Brown came out and kind of defended it first, then in a second interview kind of backed Rashawn Holmes and just kind of threw Noel to the wayside, so to speak. And Keith, I want to go to you first. What's kind of your thoughts on the Nerlens Noel situation?
Yeah, both sides need a divorce from this situation as soon as they can get it. It's just ugly. It's not going to end well for anybody. 76ers don't need that around a bunch of other young guys. That kind of open questioning of the coach and the organization as a whole. So that definitely needs to be cleaned up. And then Nerlens Noel needs a fresh start for himself too. Go send him somewhere where he can get some minutes, play, find out what he is. And I see both sides with this. It's frustrating for Nerlens Noel because he's a young guy drafted. Really, he was the first guy, right? So he was supposed to be their first big deal. Then they doubled down and picked Embiid. Then again, picked Okafor. So for him, it's kind of going to be a little bit like, what's going on here? You know, why did you keep picking guys at my position? And, of course, he also hasn't been healthy and hasn't been able to get on the court as much as he would like. So it's just such an ugly situation. I just want to see both sides move on as quick as they can.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Matt, what's your thoughts on Nerlens Noel?
I totally agree. They just need to move him. And obviously, what sucks, every team in the NBA, the other GMs know they want to get rid of him. So they're not going to get much back for him, I would assume.
No, I don't think they will at all. At this point, I think, you kind of waited too long if you're Brian Colangelo. He's like
Ian Clark for Nerlens Noel.
Who?
Ian Clark for Nerlens Noel.
I don't even know at this point if the Warriors want to even give up Ian Clark.
Yeah, and it doesn't work salary-wise anyway, but it would be something. They could put together something that would work. But, yeah, just move on. Everybody move on. Be done with this. And
Nerlens Noel has become the typical change of scenery guy.
And it's sad, though, because he can run the floor. He can, obviously catch lobs in a fast-paced offense. He'd be perfect. He can defend the rim. Block some shots if he's healthy and engaged. Imagine putting him on, next to somebody like Anthony Davis, where Davis can kind of stretch out, the floor a little bit. And then basically Drew Holiday can throw lobs, and it's ironic because Holiday was traded for Noel. But I think that would be a perfect fit because basically you get a rim protector, which you need. I don't really know how the salaries match up, but Omer Ashik and, some kind of, other rotation player maybe for Nerlens Noel, cut your losses and go that route. But more so, I think Okafor is the worst fit out of the three.
You know what's funny is I watched their last couple games. I think Okafor and Embiid, I don't know it's going to work perfectly, but it hasn't been too bad with the two of them next to each other. Embiid can cover for a lot of what Okafor can't do. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, I think Okafor is, if it goes this way, if he was a bench big on a good team, he could dominate second.
Oh, yeah, he'd be perfect.
With the way he can score. And the defense, his lack of defense wouldn't be such a big deal. One thing I want to go back to Noel real quick is that's why you hear a lot of people mention Boston. For that exact reason. Al Horford can step out and space the floor some. Noel can just run, get up and down, block shots, rebound, help them out. The sticking point has been Philly hasn't moved off their asking price. They've continued to ask for a pretty big amount for him, and I just don't know that they're going to get it or not.
I would probably lean more towards no just because they know the Sixers, the situation keeps getting worse by the week, especially with Noel speaking out a little bit more. So, who knows? I just hope it's resolved. As a Sixers fan, please resolve this before January, but I'm not very optimistic it's going to happen. But moving on, the All-Star voting has been changed. It's now 50% fan vote, 25% of selected media, and then 25% for the players. And what's kind of weird is the players can kind of vote for themselves. I don't know how much that will necessarily tip the scales, but it takes away the Zaza Pachulia possibly making an all-star team. But Keith, what do you think of that rule change?
Well, yeah, I don't know if you'd heard there was already this push that they thought that there was a chance that all 5 Warriors starters would get voted in because of
Wow.
the vote in Georgia, the country, not the
Right.
the state. That's been talked about quite a bit because that's how Pachulia almost got in last year.
Right.
There's been a lot of people who said there's more interest in the game than there was last year, more interest in him, and they thought they were going to vote. There's also a very real fear that if like a Yao Ming type player comes back and is prominent from China, that could so far swing the vote towards him and all his teammates that it just make a mockery of it. My personal feelings are I think this is a good change, but I don't want to go overboard. It's an all-star game. Let people see. That part's a little weird if a country's swinging the votes, but people get all up and on. Oh, they voted Kobe in when he's old. So what? Who cares? It's an all-star game.
Yeah.
You can see Kobe, let him play. What I do like to go back to the CBA is they took the all-star voting and all-star starter voting criteria out of the mix for those higher extensions, which is really great because it was in there in the current CBA, and that's not something the players really could control. So I like taking that away from there and then let people see who they want to see.
Right. Matt, what's your thoughts? You like it or not?
It's cool. It's not I don't think it's a bad thing, but if they would have kept it the same, it wouldn't have bothered me. I mean, we the fans, we pay, we help pay their salaries. Let us vote who we want to see. If we want to, if we want to see Pachulia start in the All-Star game, let the fans see Pachulia start. Who cares? It's an All-Star game. It means nothing.
It'll be interesting if like the 25% of the player vote, like they rally around one player, like let's get Joel Embiid in the All-Star game and kind of see what happens. But who knows? Our last topic for the night before we close this out is, of course, the big news that Blake Griffin is going to be out for a little bit. Another little bit of a arthroscopic knee surgery. How does this affect the Clippers? Kind of basically over the next couple weeks. Basically, was it 6 weeks is the time frame that he's supposed to be out?
3 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, they're saying 3 to 6 weeks, as Matt just said. So I think you're probably going to see them go with the small ball lineups that they played large chunks.
So Bamute will go to the 4, right?
Yep. Yeah, and Bamute will slide up to the 4. He's a little bit banged up. He's a little shoulder issue going on right now, so you might see them dig Paul Pierce out of moth balls and play
him. The 3? Are they going to go Austin Rivers or Wesley Matthews? Yeah.
My guess is it'll probably be Rivers because that's the direction they've gone thus far. But there could be nights if they're going up against a bigger 3 where they might go to Wesley Johnson and run with him there. I think you'll see Brandon Bass. This is why they got him, to be that kind of ultra-prepared professional coming off the bench. So I think you'll see him see some more minutes as Maurice Spates has really been playing the sole big man minutes off their bench. I don't think, unfortunately, that we're going to get to see either of the young kids. I don't think Bryce Johnson's quite ready to play yet, and I don't think Diamond Stone's going to make the rotation. And Doc Rivers would probably rather forfeit games than play rookies at this point. So,
damn,
he's been getting thrown out of games lately. So,
well, it's mid-season, Christmas time. It's about time for Doc to get a little cranky. So, we'll see what happens. But this is why they went and got all those bench depth guys, was to exactly so that they could weather a storm like this. And I think they made the right decision. Apparently, this has been bothering Blake for a little bit now. So it's get him in there, get it cleaned up now, so that he's back and ready for the end of the season push.
Nice. Do you think this has any effects, in your opinion, kind of on the Clippers overall?
Well, I don't think so. It's an annual thing. They expect it every year. And last year, they actually played better without him last year for that stretch that he was out. They did really well. So history tells me they'll be okay. Although teams in the West are playing better this, you got Memphis, Utah. So we'll see. They could fall a little bit. I think this helps the Rockets out. I think the Rockets can get a hold on that 3 seed and kind of maybe, have a nice little gap between them and the Clippers.
Absolutely. It's just going to be a matter of if like a guy like Rivers can sustain his kind of level of play. Can Brandon Bass step in on a nightly basis and contribute? Mo Spates, is he going to stay, basically scoring a good bit and help them out there? So that's going to be the big question mark.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it definitely takes them out of that any thought that they would, contend for San Antonio for that 2 seed
Right.
behind the Warriors. It's just not going to happen now. I mean, they lost to the Wizards with Blake yesterday. They're already starting to slide a little, and I do wonder if this may be what tips the point for Doc to consider resting his guys maybe a little bit more, because they should be at the point where they don't need home court advantage, multiple rounds deep in the playoffs to make an impact. They should be able to, get in, and even if they're a 3 or 4 seed or a 5 seed, they should be all right. But we'll see what happens.
Right. Okay. Well, that's going to wrap us up for this episode of the Unquestionably Raw podcast. But before we go, I want to highlight again 16 wins a ring. What will be a great thing for everybody to go to is go to Twitter, go to at 16 wins a ring, the number 16 wins a ring. You can click on their profile, obviously follow them, but there's a tab that says lists, and basically it gives all members of 16 wins a ring, so that way you can follow everybody, follow all of the great content. And again, it's coming December 22nd, which is Thursday, so look out for that launch. And then, Keith, I want to go back to you and just let everybody know where to personally find you and kind of what recent work you've got out there for everybody.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA, KEITH SMITH NBA, no spaces, no special characters, nothing like that. Nice and easy, at Keith Smith NBA. You can find my written work for realgm.com. I have a piece up there right now that is 2017 underrated free agents. So some guys who are flying a little bit under the radar right now that you might not know quite as well as you should, that I think have a chance to make pretty good paydays coming this summer. As well as you can find me obviously at 16 Wins a Ring when we launch on Thursday, as Pete just said. I'll have written content up there as well as all of our great writers are putting together some really great stuff for the site. So really excited to get cranked up and going.
Yes,
absolutely. And then I want to let everybody know that we are doing our first mailbag episode on Wednesday. I've already got a bunch of questions kind of put together in a spreadsheet, but I'm going to tweet out another hashtag from the Unquestionably Raw channel, as well as my own. So look out for that. Just basically you can reply with a question, just hashtag it with the hashtag that I send out. That's going to be Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, which is December 21st. We'll get to as many questions as we can. So it should be fun, kind of our way of giving back and getting everybody involved that's been a loyal listener so far. But continue to go to iTunes, subscribe to the channel. Please leave us a 5-star written review. I noticed our reviews have jumped up tremendously, but still don't have a lot of written reviews. So please take, an extra minute and a half to 2 minutes just to maybe write us a nice written review of what you like about the show. Hopefully it's a 5-star review. And then continue to go to YouTube as well. You get the video portion so you can see all our faces, each episode, and subscribe to the channel. Leave us a comment underneath the video, and we'll try to answer any questions there as well. Kind of throw those into the mailbag if there are any. But that's going to wrap us up for this episode, and we will see everybody Wednesday evening, December 21st, 7 p.m. for the mailbag episode.